going to talk a little bit about the relationship between your online class and your offline class. Why don't you take this little self-diagnostic, no matter where you're teaching. Ask yourself how many of these questions or these descriptors you would say yes to. So what about the first one?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes for both of you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm getting to the point where I'm trying not to reinvent my wheel too many times.
Right.
Because it just is too much extra time having to do that. So, I mean, I'd have to answer yes to just about everything, but not as much as I used to, because it's just, I need to be more efficient with my time.
Would you say that teaching online has helped you do less of this? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
That's sort of the short answer to my entire presentation today. Jennifer, did you want to comment on any of them?
This is my first semester teaching, so I'm still kind of trying to get a feel for like what the pace should be in my class. So I often have to modify like in-class assignment and the quizzes.
Okay, well, perfect. I'm glad you're here because you're going to get a lot of clues from us about what to do and what not to do, make your life easier as you go. And what do you teach, Jennifer?
English.
Okay, and
I'm teaching 21 right now.
Oh, great. I teach that class as well.
Yeah, I actually saw a sample of your syllabus.
Oh, okay. And no pressure. And Karen teaches ESL. So we are doing similar things. And in both of our classes, both of our classes are activity and assignment heavy. I mean, obviously, we can't just do some proofs on the board. We're constantly giving assignments and having to grade them. So, that's perfect for today's session. All right, so I guess what I'd like you to do, especially you, Karen, is sort of roughly take inventory. I'm not going to ask you to say these out loud, so you can be honest. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you were to take inventory, sort of the readiness of your offline and online classes. My guess is that, Karen, especially you, your offline classes are sort of done. You've been doing this longer than I have. So those might rank 9, 10, whatever. But think about your online classes. And think about your level of readiness and just think of that number. Now, Jennifer, your numbers might be lower because you're only teaching on campus, right? So that would mean your online number is 0.
Right.
But probably your number for your on-campus class is lower to begin with. So you're still sort of in a good place because you can build them together almost simultaneously. And you can build materials for the off-campus class that are going to be readily available to you when you do finally get an online class, which is easy to do. There's plenty to be had. So think about that as we move forward. And I'm going to, my goal is to get you to sort of an even number. I found in my own experience that my on-campus, offline classes were always at a much higher number. I'm a perfectionist, so I would never put them at a 10, but effectively they were pretty high, right? They were already, I've been doing them for years. And if I made modifications, it would just be, oh, okay, I'm going to use different words on this handout, or we're going to read a different text. But the assignments would essentially stay the same. However, for my online class, the first time you build one, it's very labor intensive. And different instructors, we've talked about it, among online instructors. Some of us sort of stay a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead of the students the first time we do it. Then the next semester through, so let's say the first semester, if you're 2 weeks ahead of them the whole time, let's say your online course readiness is like a 3 or 4, right? And then as each semester goes on, your number gets higher. As you have content from the old semesters, you just import it into the new shell. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So my goal is to give you a framework today that will allow you to get your numbers synchronous at some point. And Jennifer, as I say, you're at a perfect point for that because you'll just build as you go. And Karen, you're just looking to be more efficient in general. So for you, maybe the numbers are sort of irrelevant. I was recently at the Board of Trustees of the district, and there were teachers from around the district there to tout their innovative teaching methods. And one of the men, whose name I have not been able to get in time for our session today, said this: students learn when they are working harder than we are. I think he said students learn best when they are working harder than we are. And he is piloting an advanced or accelerated algebra program. And that really got my attention. I thought that was a perfect fit for our session today, because unconsciously that's something that I've been integrating into my revision of my courses, both online and offline. And it informs the title of today's session, Boomerang, how one thing can come around and help me somewhere else. So how can I sort of have a boomerang going in both directions, have my online work informing my offline work and vice versa? The first thing I want to say about my first few online classes, which were probably 7 or 8 years ago now, is that they allowed me to get very organized. I mean, I had to be organized in order to teach the online class, because students were already sort of at a place of anxiety with the online class, because all of the framework is unusual to them until they get used to it. And they have an anxiety because they can't see our smiling faces, okay? So they're already sort of anxious, and they want to know what are your expectations, how hard are you going to be on them in terms of their login time, how much time they spend online, how hard and soft the due dates are, things like that, which in a classroom can be finessed with interaction, tone of voice. You can get more of a fix on your professor. If something isn't spelled out in a syllabus, you still have somewhat more of an idea, well, she's pretty cool about stuff like that. I'm going to go ahead and complete it and see if she'll accept it late, right? But students have so much more anxiety in the online class because they can't see us and they can't get a fix on us for tone of voice or whatever. And hopefully they will write us and ask us those questions with the private message, but they don't always, because our shy students are still shy students. And whereas in the online class discussions, the shy students speak up a lot more to each other because they have to. Because in my online classes, the online discussion is 10% of their grades. They're required to talk back to somebody else's post, and then also to make one of their own original posts, right? But in terms of asking questions and concerns about the class, shy students are still shy students, right? So there's a heightened level of anxiety with students for the online class. And I found that the best way I could alleviate that was from the outset, making everything so organized that there was really no way for them to get lost. Now, students can and do still manage to get lost, but I've reduced that to an absolute minimum from my end. So that if they're still lost, I don't want to say it's from their irresponsibility, but let's just say maybe they haven't clicked on all the buttons yet, okay? So with some of the new tools we have in Etudes, like Course Map that I can tell you about later, we're able to push them through more of a maze and make sure that they get to the syllabus and to the introduction screen before they can get anywhere else. But all this back to my original point, that the organization of the online system actually helped me organize my stuff offline much better. In an English class, when I first started teaching, 12 years ago, I would just kind of roll in and shoot from the hip. And I would gauge, how the activity was going by student responses, and that would help me sort of recalibrate. Well, should we do this now? Should we do that now? I always had a schedule of course activities, or like what was due every day and what we were going to do every day. But it was very flexible, and I was often changing it, revising the schedule, and things like that all the time. After my online classes became as organized as they did, that helped me create a somewhat less flexible structure to use in class. Can still be flexible, to use on campus, can still be flexible when I want it to be, but it helped me to see, overall the whole thing, the whole map almost of the course, and to know what I could be flexible on and what I couldn't be flexible on without affecting my goals for the entire semester, right? So all this to say that for me, there's a great relationship between the offline and the online, and that it's been really advantageous to me to help students work harder for me in order to help each other. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. This is kind of my, experiment or my way of doing it, okay? As a suggestion to you, and I feel like you can pick and choose and be inspired as you like by these things. I believe that the instructor should always, of course, do the grading. That's just a contractual obligation. We can't legally ask students to assist us in that task. However, we can use peer review. But grading of each assignment and of course, the ultimate grade, we can't farm that out under any circumstances. And likewise, test creation. What I have done with tests, more with quizzes, but what I have done is have students generate some possible test questions or possible quiz questions, and I'll use those for quizzes. I will take that pile of paper and create a quiz. Well, I'm not creating it, I'm just typing it up. They've created all the quiz questions. And then I'll give them that quiz, because it's only going to be worth 20 points. I have stopped short of letting them create an actual test that's worth, 100 points or something like that, because I just kind of feel like that's too much, right? But I have, on occasion, allowed there to be a section on the test that is student created. So those are student-generated questions screened by me. They might have come from some of those original quiz questions. I've also given a test, like a pre-test, say before the midterm or the final, that has a lot of student-generated questions. But when it comes to the actual text of the test, I want to create the entire thing except for maybe one tiny section. Let's say, at most, I would let 10 student-generated questions on my same midterm, and not on the final at all. Now, that's just me speaking. These are things for you to think about, what would work for you. But I've set aside those two things as sort of the sacred cows, and I'm not going to mess with them. Other than that, there's a lot that students can do that's actually going to help them learn. And my list is actually a lot longer than this, but these are the items here that apply to both online and offline classes. I have a lot more techniques I use in just my offline on-campus classes, but these I feel can benefit and boomerang between both the online and the offline classes. So, quiz creation. All right, so let's say I've got an English 101 online and an English 101 offline. This is the ideal situation where I have two sections of the same class, but one is online and one is offline. Okay, that's ideal. All right, this would allow for seamless construction of some of these elements working together. So let's say I have the students online do a reverse quiz, I call it, a reverse quiz. In the reverse quiz, students are asked to generate quiz questions. Then, it's easiest, I think, to do the reverse quiz online because the students can just type it all because it's coming to you online. You can easily copy and control paste those into a Microsoft Word document, tidy it up, screen out stuff that isn't appropriate from the people who didn't actually read, etc., etc. And then you create a sample quiz for your on-campus English 101 students. Likewise, if you need to give a pop quiz in your offline class, instead of just doing a pop quiz, you can do a pop reverse quiz, okay? And this is something I've done when I'm building an online section for the first time. So I teach a lot of classes. I've taught almost every class in the sequence except for the advanced ones, which I'll have to wait a little bit longer to get from my colleagues. But I've taught 21, 28, 101, 102, 103, and 127. And except for 21 and 28, I've taught all of those online. So over the years, as the online sections are added, and I'm invited to teach one of those are the times when I have used the reverse quiz in the physical class to help me build the shell for the new online class. Does that make sense? Once you have gotten to a place where you now have online versions of all your offline classes, you won't need so many of the reverse quizzes anymore because you'll have all that content in there. In fact, after the first semester you've done it, you'll have it in there, right? You may have to do it again when you use a new play or a new book. And I'm speaking from my own, my own experience. For example, this semester I used 2 new plays in my 102 class. So for maybe 4 years, I had all the quizzes intact for the older book. But I was getting tired of that, wanted to mix it up, so I introduced 2 new plays. Now, because I'm lucky this semester to have a 102 online and offline, this was easy for me to have the students in the class or online. Each of them would have a reverse quiz, and then I boomerang it to the other group. Does that make sense? So the in-class group created all theirs on pieces of paper, I put it together, I typed those up, and then those became my week 1 reading quiz, week 2 reading quiz for those plays online. Now that's in, so as long as I'm teaching those plays, those quizzes are done. Likewise, I gave a reverse quiz to the group online the first week because I hadn't had time to actually create one, right, because it was a new play, it was the first item we read. So I just gave them a reverse quiz. So they generated quiz questions, and then I gave that to the class offline. I'm going to be screwing up these words for the entire session because it's so confusing. Offline, online, on campus, off campus. So that's just been fabulous. And this you can do at the drop of a hat. I've also heard of professors doing a group quiz. One of our math adjuncts here, Fatima is her first name. I'm not certain right now of her last name, but she does a group quiz, and I heard her talk about this, and that was a little of the inspiration behind my doing this, because the group quiz, again, you don't want it to be worth a lot of points, but you want to give them enough of an incentive to do this so that you can actually use it, either for another offline or online class. And so any of these reverse quizzes could be a group quiz. You could put them in groups to do this. Likewise with the study guide creation, although this is something that I like to supervise the class on. So for example, my on-campus class and I together will brainstorm a study guide, and then I will give that to the online class and vice versa. Now you have to be certain that they all have the same books and they all have the same assignments for that one to work. Okay. The sample proofs and rationales I had on here for anyone here from a STEM class today, but we have nobody from a science or technology or math class with us today. But this could easily be done in the same way. In fact, you could literally tape record, video record, whatever. Students doing proofs and rationales, or they could do it, videotape it with their cell phone, post it in the online class, and then you could bring that up in a tech-equipped classroom, and your whole class could watch it. And you could talk about that student's process. Of course, I would advise you to use good examples, not bad ones, because that would violate a student's privacy. Even with a good example video, I would want to check with that student and say, would it be okay with you if we watched your demonstration in class? There might be some kind of incentive involved. For example, in my English 102 online class, one of the activities I have them do is they create a PowerPoint. And this is something I started doing in the online class that I'd never done in the offline class. Like, why would I have my 1 or 2 students in class do a PowerPoint? It wasn't appropriate, but it was one of the pieces of technology that I integrated into the online class. And then I got the idea to encourage them to increase the caliber of this product. I told them the top 3 PowerPoints I will show in my physical class. So that was a way of both asking their permission and getting it. Because they're obviously not going to work anything into that PowerPoint that's going to be personal or inappropriate, because they already understand where it might be used. Whether or not I choose to use it, now I have the permission for the winners. And that has been fantastic. I mean, students are much better than I am at creating PowerPoints. As you can see, my PowerPoints are not too flashy. Students understand how to integrate audio, video, pictures, all kinds of things. And they can give you really dynamic products that you can use, cost-free. And what's best about this whole process is they are learning and creating these products. They're never going to forget that stuff because they took hours putting it together. Versus the student, writing up their paragraph right before class. So that's the most exciting thing about everything I'm telling you today is I'm not here just to talk about how I can be lazy and do less. I'm here to talk about how students creating these products is helping them learn. So for English 21, and I think even ESL, we can do the thesis statements very easily. We can have students in one class generate a list of thesis statements that we then ask the online students to look at, or vice versa, to evaluate them. And in this case, we don't even need to screen them. Because for this kind of exercise, if it's an inadequate thesis sentence, the other class can detect that. So we literally need no screening. We can just reproduce those word for word and let the other students evaluate if there's misspellings, if there's parallelism or lack thereof.
Are you just looking at the thesis statement without the essay, just the thesis statement itself?
Yeah, one of my exercises is just thesis statement generation. So I give them a list of topics, and then they have to generate 5 different thesis sentences within each topic. And it's really hard. At first they can't do it. And usually I'll set a time limit, which group can do it in 5 minutes. And
but they don't have to write anything.
No, they don't have to write the essay.
Just the top. You give them the topic,
right?
And then they come up with something that they think would work
Yes,
Thesis
so it's
statement.
just cold generation of thesis statements. Like, there's no essay to write, but you could easily do it for an essay that they have to write. So for example, let's say your class has essay 1 due next week. So last week, you had an exercise with them where everyone in class generated their tentative thesis sentence. That's going to grow into essay 1 that's due next week. You can put all those generated tentative thesis statements together, type up that list of 26, 30 responses, and use that in the online class as an exercise. Now, maybe you don't use all 26, maybe the online class evaluates 7 or 10 of them, right? But, and then of course, vice versa. You can even cross this across semesters, which I like to do a lot. So even if you don't do it in time for this semester, you save all that stuff, and then you've got it for the next semester. Does that make sense? So even if you can even go backwards and take thesis statements out of essays, because we're now into week 6, so maybe thesis statements is already behind you. But let's say they're handing in essay 2 next week. You can, as you grade them, pull those thesis statements. Or even better, I'm getting so smart about how to let the students do all this work. When I give the essay back, I would say, okay, hand your essay to a neighbor. And then everyone would have to detect their neighbor's thesis sentence. You generate the list together on the board. Now I'm lucky enough to teach in one of these tech-equipped classrooms. So I would literally type it in while they're talking. At the end of the class, I can email myself the document. Done. Now I can upload it directly into my online class and say, okay, evaluate 7 to 10 of these, or I can kind of, if some of them are mistaken, I can have them evaluate. That's the great thing about sharing student work among classes. It doesn't even have to be great, because that's a learning experience too, for them to evaluate, well, what's wrong with this? Or does this need another reason? Please stop me with any comments. Well, so I'm ahead of myself. At the bottom, anyway, students can help create assignments. But then another thing I've done is have students help search for appropriate existing lesson content for an online class. So this would apply pretty much to an online class only. And what happened one time is that I was redirecting, you'll find out, Jennifer, how you can create all of these lesson modules online, and you can create to like an existing document or PowerPoint or something on the internet. So I've got my PowerPoint here, and I can redirect them. So Module 2 is going to go over here to OWL at Purdue, and then Module 3 will come back inside Each's for my content. So one semester, one of the links was broken. And I've been teaching this class for several semesters, and I expected it to be there, but a student messaged me like, oh, the link is broken, this doesn't go, wherever anymore. And I emailed back, thank you so much for letting me know, but I think it's just blah, 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 just search this term, to find it. And then I figured later on in the day I'd go home and fix it for everybody. Well, she went looking for it, and she was a real go-getter, and she couldn't find it, and she said, it seems like it's gone. But I Googled these 5 other things, and look at this second one, it's really great. And so it was such a beautiful moment, because not only did she have this learning process of evaluating the very content that she was going to be reading to learn about. Like, so she was doing a level of critical thinking to even go online, like let's say it was topic sentence lesson she was looking for, to scrutinize 2 or 3 possible lessons online and choose one of them as the best. Then she was helping me out. I then posted a new thing for everybody, but that's how I got the idea that I could actually make this an assignment. And so where I've used that is in my English 103 class, where students have to do a research assignment. And so I've sent them at various phases on online scavenger hunts, and I've adapted that various ways. There was a fleeting thought related to that. Oh, one of the great things I've done on my online classes that I've now been able to translate finally to the on-campus classroom is that I created a final module in every class called Advice to Future 101 Students, Advice to Future 102 Students, whatever the online class is. I gave them a number of questions. It was required the week of finals week, because in this particular class, which was creative writing, I didn't give a final. You just had to hand in all your assignments, portfolio. So their only assignment that week, besides making sure their portfolio in, was to answer these questions, giving their advice to the next semester of online students in that class. That then gave me the idea to do that in all my online classes. That's flexible, that content, I can either leave it there or I can add to it each semester with the new answers. And then I got the idea, well, why not make that available to my offline students, right? So then that became a possible exercise for my offline students if, for example, the technology went down that day, or you know how things go wrong and you're unprepared. If it's towards the end of the semester, that's one thing you can always do. Make them give advice to future students in this class. Which again, not only helps you out by giving you content to share with other students, but allows students to have to reflect on and use their meta thinking skills, reflect on their own learning process and what worked for them and what didn't. In a way, it actually helps us with SLOs, because from time to time they say, well, because one question I always ask them is, which lesson or lecture or whatever was more helpful than others, or like, which one should we have had that we didn't have, or whatever. And so that stuff can directly be applied to our SLO responsibilities.
When you give points for it, or are you scoring it?
I give it 20 points, it's like credit, no credit when students complete that. Yeah. Enough incentive for them to do it, but it's nobody's gonna fail if they don't complete that. And actually, I would say that applies to everything I'm talking about here today. Credit, no credit stuff that isn't gonna kill them if they don't do it. In my classes, it's the essays that count for most of the grade, the essays and the exams. And all of this is extra cheese. All right, let me see where I want to go from here. Check my time. We have another 30 minutes, yeah? If we need it. So, some of this I've already said, but these are some things, of course, we want to consider. We want to make sure we respect student privacy and anonymity. We don't need a lawsuit, but on a basic level, we're teachers because we care about our students. So of course we need to ask permission, or the easiest thing to do is just indicate to the students that the nature of the assignment is one that will be shared with another class. So calling it advice to future 101 students just solves that problem right there. Don't create a sentence, don't create a thesis, don't, have any inappropriate content that you would be embarrassed. And obviously, no student names will be used, that's clear also. But this becomes more sensitive, number one, when you're talking about video presentations or PowerPoint presentations. In that case, you need to have student permissions. Also, if you're using bad examples. So what I've always done throughout my career is I create my own bad examples so that I'm not actually using any student work. Usually what I do to make it easy on myself is I'll almost translate the sentence. I'll change maybe the topic, and so I can keep the same sort of mistake, but it's no longer recognizable as that student's original sentence. And that's how I add in another level of anonymity, because of course the bad student's name isn't on top of it, but I don't want anyone sitting there in the class to be like, oh my gosh, you used my sentence, We also want to keep grading fair and uniform. So every now and then I have an honor student in some of my classes, and when I was in the process of building some of my online classes, and my honor students would, before I sort of had a formula for what exactly the honor students had to do, there were times when I was tempted to say, here, just create this quiz that I need for my online class this week. And I just stopped myself from doing it, because to me, that gives that student an advantage that they can choose to use. They can, if they know anyone in that class, they can say, oh, here are the answers, And so I just felt like that's a line I wanted to hold. Don't want to give any individual student any edge over anyone else. So again, for me, that's solved by just making these things group activities. Everyone in the class completes the same thing, and then I get to choose which ones I keep for the sample quiz or which ones I keep for the online class. Likewise, I try to require the same amount of work from both the online and the offline students. And this is a way that there was a boomerang effect from my online classes to my offline classes. When I first started teaching online, I didn't have a lot of weekly assignments. Because again, I was translating my on-campus classes to online. And I don't like to give a lot of quizzes in them. in the on-campus classes because I'm lazy. I don't want to have to grade them all. But a couple of things happen. In the online classes, I recognized right away that if students were not engaged on a weekly basis, they would log off and not log back on. They would log back on maybe at the last minute when it's too late, and then I get multiple messages like, is this still open? Can I still submit this? What's your policy on blah, blah, blah? Well, you should have looked at the syllabus. But regardless, you know, it was more of a hassle for me when students were not logged in frequently. So I began to create self-grading weekly quizzes. And that's not necessarily a natural thing for an English class, right? Because we don't have numbers to use. We're not making them memorize, you know, biology terms or whatever. So it's not so natural to English. But I managed it by having reading quizzes. So basically, quizzes attached to what they're supposed to be reading. Or you could even do quizzes based on the lesson content that you put in your module. So for example, if you've asked them to read chapter 1, or if you've shown them a video, or whatever you've done, you can base your quiz on that. And that has really made things a lot better for me online. Students they know already that whatever they read that week or whatever the lesson content is, they're going to have to discuss it in the discussion thread. They're going to have one quiz on it, and then it's somehow going to be worked into their essay. And essays are due, you know, not every week, but irregularly, every few weeks. And then I found that so helpful that I started doing it in the on-campus class. Something that I'd always resisted doing in the past. And the way I got around the grading work of that is that I've gone back to that sort of high school model of, okay, hand it to your classmate and we're going to grade it together. Now it's inexact, to be sure. But remember, these are quizzes, and I never make them worth more than 20 points. So if something goes wrong, I save all that stuff, by the way. I save all those quizzes. I just tell them I don't give quizzes back. So if something goes wrong and a student complains, or they say, well, I saw the student grading my paper and she didn't mark the stuff right or whatever, we can go to the quiz and I can rectify that. It's the students are giving their peers credit, no credit. You know, they're not deciding, is this an A, B, C, D, or E, or F, or F, whatever. And again, these are low stakes assignments. So whatever goes wrong, this is not going to cost the student his or her grade. It's also going to force my on-campus classes to get to class on time, because I've told them at the beginning, no makeup quizzes. So it's going to build in added incentive for the on-campus students in the same way that it keeps my online students logging in on a weekly basis. And there are many ways in which my standardization of things online has translated into my on-campus class for the better. In fact, I now keep an entire notebook of lecture content for every single one of my classes, because over the years I had to develop that and write that into the modules for the online classes. And so now I have it all organized, take the notebook with me to my physical class, and if I'm distracted that day or preoccupied or have a headache or can't think straight, all I have to do is open my notebook and everything I wanted to remember to say is there. Some of you already have that covered, because I know some people do intricate lesson plans and so forth, but I had never done that. I'd always just, I'd have a list of things and then just shoot from the hip. Now I always have the backup of the lecture, and furthermore, I can tell students all of this is available for you online. Which leads me to another point, is that for all of my physical classes, I ask for a supplemental Etudes shell. So the Etudes shell is what we use for the online students. So you can ask for one for your physical class. That might give you, Jennifer, a chance to get to know Etudes just a little bit anyway. In fact, you might ask for a developmental shell so you can get in there and look around and figure it out. And if you're familiar with Web 2.0 technologies like Facebook or any of that, you can figure it out, but you can also take that $17 prep course from Etudes, and Distance Learning can tell you about that. But then it becomes a companion to the physical class. And what I did, I started doing that basically because I had created all this content in the online classes, and I wanted to make it available to the physical classes so that if they miss a class, all of that lecture content is there. I was like, look, I've done all this work, and it was work. So I might as well make use of it. And in terms of typing up lecture content for modules, which is what I'm referencing, I know not all teachers do that. I know that some teachers just, for the lesson module, it just says, read chapter 1 in the textbook or whatever. So I know there's different ways to do that. I wanted a little more control in terms of interpreting the chapter content. So I created my own lesson in the same way that you create the lesson you give in front of the class, right? You're referencing the textbook, but you're also giving context and explanation. That's kind of how I did that. And I want to say that it took me a long time to develop all that content. You know, it wasn't all done in one semester. It wasn't all done the first semester I taught each online class. It was a process. I'm going to take a drink of water while you think about that for a second. We've already said that all of this helps us meet our course SLOs, because as we're building online courses and recalibrating both our online and offline courses, we're constantly evaluating, does this help the course objectives? How does it help or how does it not help? If students are repeatedly telling me that this particular lesson, either in the physical class or in the online class, was super helpful to us, but we really want to see one on MLA, then that's a message to me, oh yeah, why do I not have an MLA module in there? Because that's part of one of the SLOs, right? So this is a constant process of refinement that helps me more and more perfectly do what I'm already supposed to be doing. I've already talked about crowdsourcing. I mean, essentially, most of what I've been talking today about is crowdsourcing. In other words, asking the crowd, asking the students to share in the work with me, and thereby enhance their learning experience. Can you think of any other important considerations that I haven't mentioned here?
Well, I used to, because I teach, everything that I teach has an etude shell, so like I teach online and or hybrid, but I teach a section of one class online and a section on campus that has a hybrid. So back when I used to have an assistant, I had an assistant who would videotape me, and then I would put that lecture in the module for the online class as well as the on-campus class. So just in case the on-campus class, you know, missed that day or something, they didn't miss the lecture. But now that I don't have an assistant, yeah, that used to be like the best thing, and I keep reusing, because like it's for a class where I don't always change the assignments. Of course, if I change the assignment, I couldn't use that video lecture, but I don't know, I want to get more video lectures. And I don't know if you do like using that, or do you have someone, because it's really hard to videotape it because of the amount of time that then to upload it and stuff like that. So
yeah, but you were still able to do that, even though it was a huge file?
we'd stop and then
Restart it, so there's small file sizes?
yeah.
Maybe Scott can give us some expertise about that.
For YouTube?
It actually, when I did it, I don't think we did it. Yeah, we did it on YouTube. But then this was a few years ago. But what the school had a different uploading place.
Oh, we had that
It's not there anymore.
electronic storage.
Yeah. But otherwise, you can do it on YouTube.
You can do it on YouTube. They have
If you do it 10 minutes.
15-minute
of
limit,
less
but
time,
there's
yeah.
a way you can get that taken down.
Yeah.
So you can have an hour up there.
But if you don't have
I'd be curious though, how many people actually watch those, because it's been my experience that students, even if you provide a lecture, they won't watch it.
Oh, I think my students did.
They did?
Yeah. And I just really
Maybe
found
because
it
it's
really
ESL,
helpful.
because they want
Could be.
the English, but
Well, I mean, we could also use the course map prerequisite tool to force students to
Right.
to watch
If you don't
it.
watch the video, then you can't go on to the next.
well, I mean, not watch a video, like just a repeat of a lecture, like an hour-long lecture or a 45-minute.
But maybe that's why ESL students do it, because
Yeah.
if they don't catch it
Right.
language-wise,
Right,
then they want to go back and,
right.
But unless you have someone who can do it, I mean, I just happen to have an assistant that's a nice person.
Well, I have a flip cam. I didn't bring it with me here. Have you seen one, Jennifer? The flip cam is smaller than this water bottle. It's like maybe the size of the palm of my hand, and a USB port comes out the side. So when you're done filming, you put it right into the computer. But obviously, it still generates large file sizes. Now, the Flip Share program compresses those significantly, but it's really doable. I haven't actually used it yet for my online classes, just for that reason that it's labor intensive. But while you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about ways that we could incentivize students to do this. I also have a tripod that I got at the dollar store. So I can literally tape myself. I would just have to wrangle with, you know, all of that uploading and stuff. Is there a way I could incentivize a student to do it, but also not privilege them over others? I don't know. I'd have to kind of think about how I could do that. Maybe I could put groups on this assignment, and each group could be responsible for videotaping probably something they've done more than me. Because you're right that as the text changes or as the activities change, that video of my lecture would be outdated.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever the students do, like if you're asking them to discuss, you know, birthday customs throughout the world, that's something that students every semester could watch and evaluate. So these are some great ideas, and we should keep thinking about them. If not, make students brainstorm about how we could use some of this stuff. I mean, because we can literally ask them, what would help you learn in this course? And we can create surveys in Etudes, and of course we can survey with a show of hands in a real class and ask them, what kind of video would you prefer, or like would help you, or whatever. So once we figure that out, that's item 1 here. So these are things that the online class could do for the offline class, and vice versa. And with our English levels and our ESL levels, I think there can be a lot of bleeding in between levels. Like, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be matched. I mean, yeah, it's ideal if I have a 1 or 2 online and a 1 or 2 offline, where their assignments are going to mesh perfectly. But, I mean, my English students, no matter what level, are all working on similar things. There's a lot of, like, you know, it bleeds between them. Like, there's redundancy. So a lot of them are wrestling still with thesis statements, even as far away up as 102 or 103. So these are things that can be used back and forth across levels. So in a video, a student could upload a video in which they summarize a passage. So we could practice summarizing, or, you know, quoting exactly, paraphrasing, citing a source, attribution, like according to researchers, blah, blah, blah. They could demonstrate a process. So for math students, they could demonstrate, they could do a proof on, you know, or they could do probably on a piece of paper or something because they don't have a board at home. They could demonstrate a procedure, like a lab procedure, if there's any science teachers in our audience today. Then, the great thing is, the other group can critique, summarize, or respond to the student video. So, one group is creating the video and the other group is responding to it. Likewise with the PowerPoint, which I'm using effectively already. So I'm having the online group create the PowerPoints and I'm having the offline group respond to it. I could do it just as easily the other way, but I haven't done that yet just because if you're already taking an online class, I already know that you have made available a computer for your use for the semester, obviously, because you're taking my class online. So that increases the chances that you're going to have the Microsoft Suite and you can make a PowerPoint. I did literally get an email from a student last week saying, I don't have, what was she asking? She doesn't have Word, and so she couldn't open the syllabus. And I wasn't sure how to answer her because I kind of felt like, look, you're going to need Microsoft, like you're going to need Word to do stuff all semester. You're going to have to create PowerPoints, you're going to have to view PowerPoints, stuff like that. So essentially I told her that, and I said, you're going to have a long and hard road if you don't have this, so you need to find a way to get access to it, and I pointed out she could use our library, yada yada. But then I also told her, if you want to submit me a document from Microsoft Works, just make sure that you save as Word 2.0, you know. I told her the burden was on her. I'd never been asked that before. But that's an example of how a lot of the students in an offline class might have more of that challenge. In other words, they haven't signed up to take it online. So therefore, they may not have a computer readily available, and if they do, they may not have paid all that money for Microsoft. However, if you have one of these tech-equipped classrooms, or if you request one, you can still reap the benefits of all the creative material that your online students have done. So any of that can be brought up for the use of the on-campus class. Obviously, in our physical class, we can use any lesson, video, or study guide created by the online students. We can also do a meta writing about what we've just read or watched. How is this helpful? How is this not helpful? Advice to other students, one of the best things I ever thought of. How do you agree with this advice? What do you think about what they said about how to be successful in an English class? One of the other things I've done in the physical class, especially to prepare for tests and exams, is I'll put students in groups. In fact, I did this last week in my 102 class. We just finished our drama unit. We read 3 plays together. I created 3 groups. They were fairly large, so it was a little unwieldy, but we have one of these brand new big classrooms, so there was plenty of room. And each group was responsible for a play. And they had to create a lesson, basically reviewing the play for the class based on these 4 things that I put on the board. You know, one was summary, one was the literary terms that apply, you know, things like that. And so each group had maybe 20, 25 minutes to prepare. And then they came up and presented for like 5 to 10 minutes. And it was fabulous. I mean, every time I do this, every time I make students create a lesson, it's always fabulous. I mean, for whatever reason, because some of them might even screw something up, but some other aspect of what they're doing is so cool and fun for us watching. But at the bottom of all that, like I've been saying all today, is that this whole process forces them to learn. Like in the act of selecting, well, what's the important thing here? Well, how do we apply this term? Like that is forcing them to learn this, you know, on top of the learning they've already done by reading it and completing the assignment. Plus, they're more likely to remember when they're taking the test, oh, that's right, they, you know, group A sang that song, and how did it go, blah, 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 and to help them remember for the test. So, I mean, they literally almost had me in tears last week, laughing and crying because of all the stuff they came up with. One group created a whole Jeopardy, like, skit, and they put a Jeopardy board on the board, and one girl had an iPad, and she, like, played the Jeopardy song, and the other ones were playing the contestants. I mean, they came up with all of this in 15 or 20 minutes. It was unbelievable. The other group acted out like a classroom, told us we were 5th graders and we had to respond like 5th graders. And that allowed them to really clarify the points. No, you don't understand. Actually, what, you know, hubris means is blah, 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 blah. And so any of that could be videotaped with, of course, if you got their consents or whatever, their consents for legalities. For the online class, you know, I think there's lots of ways we could brainstorm to use these techniques. Here are some more items. So we can have students offline or online posing questions to each other, creating, generating, brainstorming together topics for take-home essays. You know, you can give them some ownership of tests without letting them write any part of the test. So you can say, okay, part 1 is going to be objective. Everybody has to answer these first 40 questions. But for part 2, you have the choice of these 4 areas, you know. There's a lot that you can do to incentivize their participation while still maintaining your control over the test. Then there's the old-fashioned peer review thing. Number 3, correcting anonymous student work, maybe some of which you created. But again, the bad examples that come across our desk can be sort of copied or translated by us so that we don't have to brainstorm completely out of our head bad examples. Also, creating a grading rubric together can be really valuable. So what kind of essay will deserve an A? What do you guys think? What kind of essay should not pass at all? What is just not acceptable? What do we expect of each other? Another thing I've done recently in the 21 class is every time they submit an assignment, I have them pass it to somebody next to them, and everybody looks at what somebody else has done. Now, I had to clear it with them in the beginning. I said, I'd like to do this thing this semester where you're going to look at least one other student's work every time we hand, piece of work every time we hand something in. And I'm like, no, that's like a little weird because, you're going to feel a little vulnerable, but if I give you advance notice now, is that cool? Nobody, write your life story or anything that you're not going to be comfortable with somebody reading. I said the benefit I feel really outweighs that, a little bit of anxiety. The benefit is that you get perspective. You get to see, well, what are other people doing? And how is what I've done different or the same? Or am I kind of where I need to be? Or, it just has value. Whether or not they can voice what they see, because I usually ask a question once they give it all back, like, okay, well, did you see something different? Well, what was it? Or did you see something you liked that your classmate did? What was that? Kind of thing. And what I never ask them about, but what I'm always hopeful is that they might realize there's something they did right that someone else didn't do. And that's a unique feeling for some of our students. Especially our English 21 students with a history of poor academic performance, to get a feeling, oh, I did exactly what I was supposed to do because I noticed she doesn't have blah, blah, blah. And that's not ever something I'm going to ask them to voice because I don't want anyone to feel bad. I just want some people to silently feel good.
How do you feel about, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk.
Go for it.
Okay, how do you feel about asking like someone that did the assignment really well?
Yeah.
Like actually asking them, can I show your assignment to
I
the
just
rest
ask
of the class?
them. Yep. I just ask them. And as a matter of fact, I've now created a 21 reader. It's like 50 pages long. And it's a packet that I give out at the beginning of the semester. And basically this was a direct result of getting so organized online that I wanted to be that organized offline. And I was sick of like having to run every morning before 9 o'clock and get my copies from Rep Row. And so I spent an anguished 3 weeks one January and just got it all done, all my handouts together, everything I wanted in there. And at that time, I had some student work, that I had saved, and I contacted those students and asked for permission, and a number of them have gone right into the reader. So I've integrated it directly in, and so I basically emailed them and said, hey, you wrote a really good blah, 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 can I use it in the reader? And they were thrilled, and everybody's happy. I also gave them the option I could use either your first name, your full name, or no name. You can just say student name, But all of them chose to have their full name in there and take full credit for it, so that was kind of cool. And
I find that's challenging sometimes because I worry that even like some of the students that wrote, like a good summary, like there's still grammatical errors in there, and
Yes.
I'm worried that in some way or another I'm going to reinforce,
Right.
Other students like making the same errors.
Well,
And
I
it's
actually-
really difficult to find one that's like error-free or.
Right. Well, there's two ways you can do this. You can email a student after it's already been submitted and graded, or sometimes I'll write on there, oh, see me about using this. And then I'll say, you see all the corrections I made on your paper. Could you correct those and give me that corrected form to use, right? Because that gives them a chance to learn and incentivizes their correcting those things, because they're going to get the glory. But I had a situation this semester where another student, I do this showcase thing in the spring, and some Fran students, basically, another colleague, sent her students to my event for extra credit. She made them write up a summary of the event, and then she gave me the copies. And so as I was getting ready to teach this semester's students about it, I wanted them to see one of these students' write-ups. And we couldn't get a hold of that student. It turned out the student had only been here one semester, and so I couldn't get the person's consent. I couldn't get them to change anything. And so I asked a bunch of colleagues, what should I do? I don't want to reinforce, these things. And basically what we decided was that I corrected the stuff myself. I retyped it. And I just corrected the errors. So that kind of solved the problem. But I feel the best answer is just get the student's permission. Be I'd really like to use this next semester. or even, I'd really like to use this in my online class next week, but could you, correct these things for me? And then the final item, demonstrate why a student's paper got the grade that it did. So I'm sure this is something we've always done. I mean, I used to do this back when we had overhead projectors. I would put either real or fake student anonymous work up, and we would be like, okay, what's great about this introduction? Is this an A introduction? Is this a B introduction? Like that. So all of that can still be done. So all of this back and forth is what I'm referring to as the boomerang effect, and I think I have said that this is not limited to strict class-to-class correspondence, like 102 online, 102 offline, that it can go between levels, at least in my discipline, and since we're all in the same discipline, then it applies to all of us. Another thing that I've done recently, which I haven't yet extended to the online class, but I'm sure there's a way to do it, is I'm having former students from last semester's physical class come and speak to this semester's physical class. And it is the coolest thing. So I did it because I'm asking students to do this large project, the showcase that's going to be on the quad on May 15th. And so it's a daunting project that they're given at the beginning. They find out they're going to have to write 8 full pages, in increments, of course. They're going to write a total of 8 pages, and then they're going to be creating a project poster and displaying it in the courtyard. So I asked several students from last semester to come talk to this semester's group, and I asked them some leading questions. We discussed it beforehand. The one guy wanted to prepare his remarks on index cards. He had just taken a speech class. I'm like, good, go ahead, do what you want. But the other girl, I said, let me just ask you some questions. So she got up there, she said a little bit. In the meantime, I love our new equipped rooms. I had a picture of her and her poster from last year smiling up top while she's talking. And I said, now how did you feel at the beginning when I introduced this? Like, what were your feelings? Blah, 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 blah. And what was the hardest thing for you as you were going through? What was your biggest challenge? Blah, 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 blah. So it was like perfect because I wish I had videotaped it, and I definitely will next semester, because students were just like, like we were literally getting inside their process immediately and addressing the worries and the concerns that they were having. And this is the greatest thing. And you know what I did to thank these students is I basically told them, we have so few classes and stuff, that I just told students, I will write you a letter of recommendation if you do this for me, or I can add you to one of my other English classes if you need one of my other English classes. I'll add you over CAD. And so 2 of them did that, and then a 3rd student did it just to do it. And hopefully she'll eventually need a rec letter or something like that. And now I'm going to start doing that in all the classes, because it was one of the most helpful things I've ever seen unfold before my eyes. So that's the testifying, item 2. Another thing I've always done is when I am teaching a strict 102 to 102 correspondence, like class-to-class correspondence, online, offline, I will allow the online students to attend the on-campus course if they want. And for a while I was teaching the Saturday compressed 8-week 102. And so that class went much faster, but there ended up being some correspondence because the online class was going slower. And so by the time the 8-week class got to a certain book, the other class was at the certain book, right? And so a couple of my online students showed up for the Saturday lecture on Animal Farm, because they wanted to have that benefit if they could. And that was great. And I always just say, oh, introduce yourself, so that I get to meet you. And there isn't really any incentive for them. They don't get any points for doing that, but some of them just like to do that. And then finally, to talk about SLOs, and then we need to wrap up, we can solicit feedback from students we get to know who have taken classes from us both places. And the way this happened for me was an honor student. This was the same honor student that I was tempted to have write a quiz for me. Instead, what I asked her to do was write up some of the techniques she found I was using in both venues, and then where she thought my content was stronger. And that was like single-handedly the best thing I've ever gotten in terms of SLO, like self-assessment in terms of how I'm teaching. Plus, bottom line, time, it forced her to evaluate what makes good teaching, what lessons are better and why, which ones are more effective, which ones communicate to me better, which helps her reflect in the long term on her own learning process. So this is a win-win, people. We're out of time to brainstorm, but maybe as a follow-up for this class, you can think about, I'm sure you have been thinking about, because I've been looking at your faces, how you can apply this. Does anyone want to mention before you go?
Well, I'm definitely going to do your, the advice component for the last module, because I think, you know, it's, since I do teach both, the same class, both online and offline, I get so much feedback from the on-campus class that I kind of forget to you know,
Right.
to focus on that, because I think since I'm doing it, everything seems, you know, I try to keep the things the same, but still, I'm not really looking at it through the eyes of the
Yeah,
online
they
student.
seem like two different hands.
Right,
Yeah.
so I'm definitely gonna do that, yeah, I like that.
Any thoughts, Jennifer?
Definitely the helping them prepare for like an in-class exam or for their next paper or writing assignment, breaking them up into groups and giving each group like a responsibility to come up with some
Yeah.
like the main points
Yeah.
or give them some guiding questions so that they're, you know, equipped to answer
Yep.
those questions. Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Right on. Well, thank you for attending today. And I hope it's okay to use your voices on our video.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
We get paid for that, Scott?
Said you're a girl.
Our rituals.
Yes.